I used various pieces of hardware and software throughout my project. In terms of hardware, for filming, I used my Canon 100D, which gave me beautiful HD picture quality. But to optimize the camera's potential, I had to do some research first into some of the technical features about shooting with a DSLR. Using YouTube, I watched tutorials from Dave Dugdale, Wex Photographic, and Fenchel and Yanish, which I found really informative as it helped me to get the most out of filming with my camera. I learned about using the bokeh effect and the depth of field to give me another element to my cinematography. Bokeh is the outer focus parts of the shot created by the lens. Having a shallow depth of field was one of the finer qualities of shooting with the DSLR that I got to use. I was shooting with the standard 18 to 55mm kit lens, which has an aperture range of 3.5 to 5.6. To get the bokeh effect, I had to keep the aperture as low as possible, so I had to shoot at an 18mm focal length, which gave me the 3.5 aperture. Using some lenses with a lower aperture, like 1.8 or 2.8, like on the 40mm and 50mm prime lenses, would have increased this effect, but I was happy with what the standard kit lens produced. To keep the brightness as high as possible, I kept the aperture as low as possible, meaning that the iris was as wide as possible, by using the lowest focal length for most of my shots, which was generally 18mm, which would let as much light into the sensor, making the shot as bright as possible. This was really important, mainly in the cellar where the low light was a bit of an issue, particularly in the cupboard. Switching from auto to manual focus for shooting was really important. This is because the autofocus makes a lot of noise that's picked up by the internal mic. Shooting with manual focus also allowed me to explore techniques I wasn't able to last year, like using the focus pull. I could direct the audience's attention, like at the beginning of the father's flashback, and also when the boy enters the kitchen, as well as when the father is fixing the stool. Understanding lighting while shooting with a DSLR is really important, and so during my research, I learned about the ISO. Watching tutorials in my research, I learned about the impact of the image noise. Image noise is the level of graininess that you get on your footage. So if the ISO is higher, then it increases the image noise, whereas if you keep the ISO to lower levels, to 100 or 200 for example, then you reduce the image noise and you get a much crisper picture. But I had to have a higher ISO of about 1600 in the cellar because the cellar cupboard was quite dark. But nevertheless, the image quality was considerably better than last year when I filmed using a Canon Legria camcorder in the dark night conditions. So I was really pleased with what the Canon 100D produced for me. Using other hardware also allowed me to develop filming techniques. For example, using my skater dolly, I was able to gain a wider shot variety using tracking and arcing shots, which made the cinematography look nicer and more professional. My Manfrotto tripod was really useful to get still shots, while my handheld dolly helped me for steadier movement, like with the fleeing scene. It was particularly useful for the lower handheld shots because it was more comfortable to hold than to handhold the camera itself. I carried out the research, planning and evaluation all on my Mac. I used YouTube, Virgin Media Shorts and the Short of the Week to watch short films for my research. I also used YouTube for uploading videos, like my film at its various stages. I could send the link to members of my target audience to get feedback. I use WordPress once again for the documentation of my production. Using an online blog like last year was really useful, being able to upload images, videos and graphs from my target audience feedback, which overall enhanced the documentation visually. I also used Scribd so I could upload Word documents to my blog, like my script. The portability of my Mac was really useful and allowed me to work on my project anywhere, anytime, which was particularly beneficial for the post-production. In terms of software, I used Final Cut Pro. Its features allowed me to edit the colour scheme for my flashbacks, decreasing the shadows and the highlights while increasing and decreasing the exposure for various shots. Editing the colour and adding effects like the vignette were new techniques I hadn't used before but were really successful in helping convey the flashbacks and therefore the story. They allowed me to create a contrast between the dark, fearful flashback and the bright and warm coloured ending. Again, watching tutorials on YouTube, I was able to research these techniques to be able to employ them. As well as using YouTube for research, I used it for uploading videos of my own. For my film poster, I used Photoshop, allowing me to create a professional looking media text. Using Google to find web forums and tutorials on techniques in Photoshop complemented my production. Using Google, I could find forums and tutorials explaining how to employ certain techniques in Photoshop. Using layers, I added my first photo followed by the title and then the text. I imported the fonts, movie letters and fine style from DaFont to use for my billing card and title. Using InDesign allowed me to get a professional appearance for my review, so it would look genuinely like an Empire review. Some aspects I had to import, like the image and some fonts, but mostly I used the tools of the software, like the lines to create the Empire style formatting of the page. It allowed me to get a professional looking finish to my review. I could create the page layout like the review in an Empire magazine.